Hello, and welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast. We'll be talking to experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills, and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and marketing director at Osprey Approach. Today, I'm joined by a legal tech consultant, speaker, advocate for accessible people first innovation, and author of the book Beyond the Features. With a career spanning nearly 3 decades in the legal industry, he helps law firms modernize with purpose, navigate change, and build systems that truly support the way people work. David Langdon, welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
So, today we'll be discussing how to effectively and successfully implement legal tech into your law firm. We'll cover how to effectively plan and prepare before implementing the tech. We'll also cover tips for vendor selection, how to choose a change champion, and how to compare more than just the software features. But first, David, before we dive in, tell us a little bit more about your background and the experience that's led you to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. 30 years in the industry makes me sound quite old now. Uh, but yeah, it's been a bit of a long journey. My dad is a retired sole practitioner in the northeast of England. So I grew up with legal speak sort of in my everyday vocabulary. Never wanted to be a lawyer, but an opportunity a couple of years after leaving uni, I was at actually doing CRM systems implementation in the motor industry in the UK for a couple of years. And then the opportunity came up to go and work for a pretty large law firm in London. So I decided to pack up from the Northeast and headed down to London and started in the marketing department of a law firm. Um, from there, that's really where I got sort of invested in the whole sort of ecosystem of legal tech. And from there, I joined Elite, tech vendor. They were the firm I was at was using Elite at the time. I was implementing their CRM system from the law firm side, and just got fascinated by how to help law firms get this tech to work. And the tech back then in the late 90s was very different to the tech that's there today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a journey. We were saying just before we press record that once you invest yourself in the legal industry, it seems that you never leave, whether that's being an actual solicitor or in tech.
Yeah, it's hard to get out, that's for sure.
Well, your experience and knowledge is definitely going to help us today. So, today we're going to be talking about the best practices and advice for implementing tech. As part of the intro to your book, you say the reason you wrote the book is because you've seen what happens when good firms make poor tech decisions and how avoidable those outcomes are. And I mean, perhaps there are listeners who can resonate with that. And I've certainly heard stories myself about when the time or investment they feel it hasn't paid off. And I've certainly spoken to so many law firms who have been burnt before and are now really cautious to change. Can you share the top 3 things you wish that all law firms knew about investing in implementing tech to help us get started?
Well, I guess I'll limit it to three. There's quite a few of them out there over the years, but I think to focus on three things, I really think that preparation and sort of understanding what's needed is primary focus. Too often over the years, a firm would approach me as a software vendor and tell me they needed a solution uh, for their finance team with no context, no real reason why. Um, so just not having that background plan or thought as to actually what they're trying to achieve by changing a solution. So that would certainly be one area that I think you definitely need to make sure you understand what's happening in the firm. Um, I guess from another point of view, it's really just about really defining what it is you're actually trying to achieve. Another major thing I see firms doing wrongly is that they make it an IT project. It really
Mm,
needs to be a business project. So the entire firm needs to be involved in it. You can't just say IT's decided that they need a new dock automation solution this week, so they go off and run it. They're the worst people to determine whether it's correct or not. I mean, if you think about software development, the software developers are probably the worst people to develop the software in some cases because they're doing it from the technical perspective. So you do need a variety of people involved in the whole project to make sure it's successful and you're covering all of the points that you need to. And I think The final of the three that I'll pick on today is really plan for change. Most firms I've come across don't really see beyond the go live.
Mm.
They perhaps have some requirements. They perhaps have a plan, but what they don't have is a plan for adoption. So they'll go live, they'll have a bit of a party, and that's it. But there's no real planning for change. And the change management aspect of legal tech transformation is huge. Selecting the software is just one small piece of the journey, really.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So what I'm hearing there that the three key things is prepare, make sure you've got a preparation, you know what you're trying to
Yep,
achieve. Make sure this isn't an IT project, it's a business-wide project. And also plan for the change. So have an idea and a plan for adoption, not just go live. And
yeah, exactly.
your book is really practical. It offers step-by-step guidance to do all of those things, and we're going to touch on those in a second. So let's start at the beginning. It's a practical place to start. Part one looks at defining needs and setting the foundation. So this begins by identifying the problems you're trying to solve. I think firms are often told to start here, and it's sort of widespread advice, but I really want to be really practical about how they do that. How do firms effectively document their product their problems so they know it will be solved within the process?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it is something that firms, they know they have to prepare, they know they have to plan, but it is, as you said, it is getting it right is difficult. Again, it's talking to different groups of people that use the same solution. You can't just interview the person in accounts who says that the bank rec doesn't work very well in the finance system. That's not a reason to change your entire finance system when the lawyers out on the floor are quite happy with the way that time entry runs and the billing process happens. So you really need to make sure that you're covering everybody. So when you're sort of documenting sort of requirements, you need to talk to subject matter experts in all corners of the building. And if anything, it's quite good, and this is not a plug for my own consulting services, but it is a good idea to get someone who really has a fresh pair of eyes to take a look at what is working and what's not. So it may be when you're looking at buying a new solution that the system you've got is actually fine. It's just not being utilized correctly. So sometimes finding out what's working well is as important as trying to address pain points. I think that's a major way of improving how you can sort of gather those requirements.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I mean, we always recommend to talk across um, different departments and different users within those departments, especially at different levels within the firm. Everybody has a view on how this is supporting them in their role. But I like your idea of
Hmm.
focusing on what's working as well as what isn't in that initial sort
Yeah.
of scoping phase. So let's focus on the title of your book for a moment, Beyond the Features. Chapter two is all about understanding the software features. It covers the RFP trap, why functionality isn't everything, and how to categorize those features into must-haves and nice-to-haves. If it isn't about collecting features, what is it about?
I think it's features is exactly where people get caught up. I've been on the receiving end of a number of RFPs over my almost 3 decades. I see the same thing time and time again. I give an example. If I'm responding to an RFP for a new CRM system, as a vendor, I don't really want to see on the RFP, does it allow you to create a contact? Does it allow you to create a company? Can I create a marketing list? Well, if it doesn't, you're looking at the wrong solution in the first place. But they're just checkboxes that the vendor wastes their time on. So you're not actually getting good responses from the vendor because they're spending their time with spreadsheets. I've received spreadsheets for RFPs which are 700 rows long, and you literally spend your time just ticking the boxes in the spreadsheet with no real context around what it is that it's actually achieving. So when it comes to sort of looking beyond the features, I'm very much of the mindset that when you're looking at a solution, it's how does the solution you're looking at fit within your existing tech stack? Is it going to require to change other things in the tech stack that you already have? How does it integrate with other solutions? I mean, 20 years ago, it was almost impossible. It was all point-to-point integration. So times have changed, and that is a little bit easier now. But very much making sure about the vendors I guess, underlying platform. Everyone's going cloud and SaaS-based solutions now. So take a look at the cloud, the security aspects of the system, what the vendor's roadmap is, what their policies are on security and how they maintain their systems. So not really the feature set, because you can, a lot of the cases, if you're looking at a document management system and you approach a document management vendor, you should be pretty confident that they can manage documents. But it's really around everything else that goes with that. So it's how is this going to fit with the culture of my business? There's no point buying a new doc automation system if it takes two or three extra clicks than you're already using with the system that you had for the last 5 years. So there's a whole heap of criteria I think that are around outside of just the feature set. I mean, features are important, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they should be the focus of a selection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we find ourselves basically saying, of course it does the things you need it to do. Of
Yeah.
course, Osprey manages cases for you. It'd be absolutely bizarre if it didn't. You want to get into the
Mm.
juicy bits, like you said, the platform, the future, the support, the services around that. How, I guess the reason why people go for features is because it's the easy thing to compare. I guess comparing all
Yeah.
the other stuff is more difficult.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I had a story. I think I put it in my book. I've certainly written about it on LinkedIn. I spoke to a legal tech vendor a few months ago, just when I was sort of starting my business. Um, and when I asked him about how he handles RFPs, he told me he doesn't do them. He refuses to respond to them, which I wish I'd probably done more of that when I was at Elite, because some of them are terrible to respond to. But he said that the solution he was providing, and he provides an ERM tool, so an enterprise relationship management tool, to map who knows who. And he felt that his system did that really well. But he was up against CRM systems like Interaction, for example, who are full-blown CRM systems. And when you're completing an RFP for a CRM solution and you've only got 10 features and Interaction has 110, you're kind of at a disadvantage from the beginning. So he prefers not to answer it based on this tick box. Um, because he's going to lose every time based on number of features. But what he did to provide to me afterwards was that if you go back to the firm that chose the full-blown CRM system 6 months down the track, and ask them how it's going, it turns out that they'll probably tell you that they're only using 10 features, which happen to be the 10 that his solution provides. So it kind of it gets in the way and it muddies the waters. And I think one of the things I would encourage firms to do, we may get onto this later in the discussion, but is to really do scenario based sort of RFP. So
Mm.
let the vendor shine, let them show you what their system can do based on perhaps a few scenarios that you want them to follow, rather than getting them to say, yes, I can add a contact, yes, I can add a company, yes, I can export the contact, yes, I can export the company. It doesn't make that vendor stand out at all. It doesn't allow them to tell you what their system can do.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I wish more people ask that of us because you're right. Not only does it let us show and shine, but it also allows you to see things you may have not considered. There may be options or
Exactly.
features or improvements that you, as a firm, you hadn't gone into this process thinking about.
Yeah, very true.
In this section, I've written down a quote that I really loved. You said, the best solution isn't the one with all the bells and whistles, it's the one that quietly helps your firm gets things done. I just think that sums it up beautifully.
Yeah, it does. There's not much else to say to that, really. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at all the different solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, you know that there are some features that matter, especially if you're looking to really innovate and really improve and really take your firm to the next level. So, just touching on the features with everything else aside, how do you know the features that are the most important to your firm? How do you go about mapping those?
Like, and this does come back to the planning and preparation part of the whole process, to understanding what is working well. So don't change what's working well. And of the things that aren't working well, will the new solution, is it going to address that? What are you trying to get out of it? Is it saving time? Is it saving money? Is it just improving the workflow of a particular to function? And distinctly categorize features based on we need to have this. So most of the time when someone goes to market for a new system, whether it be CRM, document management, practice management, case management, there's two or three things that that firm is 100% looking to address, and then probably 103 things that they'd love to have, but quite often they get blended together and it's hard to determine what it actually is that the firm is looking for. So it's definitely, I would be advising firms to clearly categorize what is essential from day one, what perhaps they would like to have down the track and make sure that the platform is capable of doing it when they're ready, and then things that, yeah, it'd be great if we could do that, but it's not essential. So, and again, talking to the different groups of people makes a big difference. I think I mentioned before. So if you're talking about the billing process, there's no point just talking to the people in finance who send out the bills. You need to talk to the lawyers and the secretaries who are actually doing the time card editing and processing all of the performers at the end of each month, and looking at how the narratives are all written in the time cards. So you can't just rely on the one sector of the business to tell you what features you need. Because it may well be that that burning feature that is one department's problem may not be a problem for anybody else. So you do need to get the full picture from every different team in the business.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I find firms most have is actually just decision fatigue. There's so many options
Yeah.
out there that they go to market, they see very similar systems, probably because they've not asked the right questions, and they just don't know what to decide, and they end up rolling with a system that still doesn't suit them. I guess having this split
Yep.
helps them make a decision easier.
Yeah, I've seen RFP processes go nowhere. I've
Yeah.
seen them fall over because they've just ticked boxes and they've not really categorized their requirements and understood what is essential and what's not, and then they end up no better off than they were after 2 months of looking at solutions that all do the same thing. So I do think just, yeah, just prioritizing what is essential. Again, when you're implementing a solution, another big mistake, if I go back to the first question you asked me, things I wish people would do is that they would just accept the software solution that's being provided that's out of the box. Clearly, there's going to be a
Mm.
couple of things that you have to have from day one, but that's part of the initial scope that you would do with that vendor. You would map that out and say, look, it's critical. I have to have this for day one, but keep it as close to the stock as you can. Too many times I've seen firms move from one CRM system and they want to bring everything with them and they want it to work exactly the same way as they used to because that's kind of what they're used to. Doesn't make sense to do that at all. And again, we'll come on to things like data migration, I'm sure, at some point in this conversation. But I think it's really important to make sure that there's some clean lines along the way here.
Yeah, because nobody goes out of their way to do change their software just for the fun of it. Like you need to make sure it's going to deliver value to you, essentially. You don't want to be doing it and be in the same place, if not worse, once it's done.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, actually, I've seen so many times now. There's been a lot of consolidation in the practice management
Mm,
marketplace of late, and I come across firms that have had, I guess, old Windows-based systems, server-based systems that have been around for 20 years. They don't know what they don't know, and they're comfortable with what they've had, and they expect new systems to do the same thing. So being able to educate firms as to what's out there, it's really important to take a look at what the market is doing. Don't just assume that you need to replace one system with something that does exactly the same thing. Because A, it won't exist now because it's changed so much, and B, it's not going to help you move forward as a business.
yeah, that's a great shout, actually. I think that's what you said about external help and external ideas can really help with that, whether it's your peers or other law firms who've been through it, or whether it's,
Yeah,
yeah, consultants that have been there, done that, got the t-shirt.
exactly. I mean, we're not free as consultants, but in the long run, it's probably quite cost effective to get someone in to give you legitimate, up-to-date industry advice. Whether you decide to take it or not is irrelevant, but it's just to have that different perspective of what's going on in the market when, as a firm, you just put your head up out of the above the wall to see what's going on because you've been buried for the last 15 years. It's hard to really sort of establish what's good and what's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to talk about change management. It's such a big part of your book, but it's also a big part of the process, and
Mm.
crucially, often the reason it goes wrong, and often the reason that there's so many risks involved. So, based on your own experience of all the advice and guidance that you've got to share, can you pick maybe two or three things that you feel you've seen that have had the biggest impact and success when managing change? Are there any particular strategies or moves that firms can do?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things to do. I think the first one I would mention relates to people. Get the right people involved from the very beginning. I mentioned before, it's not an IT project, it's a business project. You need to have a really strong stakeholder team when you start out with the project. There needs to be people at different levels of the business with a clear understanding as to why you're doing it, to encourage the move forward, really. So just having two, three people that you pulled off their day jobs to run the project isn't going to help you be successful. But having the managing partner on board, maybe a couple of senior lawyers, some of the senior secretaries, some of the IT, the accounts team, they don't have to be involved every single minute of every single day, but just to keep them in the loop, which again then comes to my next point is communication. If you keep your entire staff base informed along the way, then there aren't going to be any surprises at go live. I see far too often these projects are run as insular projects, and perhaps there's a note goes out and says, we're going to be upgrading our PMS system in the next 6 months. Watch out for further info. And that further info never happens until you get the email that says, right, we're going dark this weekend. We're migrating to the new system. You'll get training on Monday. That's not a way to succeed and bring people up into the new environment. So definitely a guided approach to just comms. They don't have to be doing everything. You can just say, look, new system's doing this. Put out a couple of feedback surveys, some questionnaires early on. What do you like about the system we've got today? What would you really like to see with the new system? And use that feedback to help build and develop your conversations with the vendor throughout that process and then through the implementation. So it makes a big difference. I probably think the other thing I would add is I mentioned it before as well as plan for beyond the go live. Make sure that there is an adoption plan. So it's great to have the go live party, but that hangover can last a long time if you don't have a plan. So again, no point just switching on the system on Monday morning and expecting everybody to be able to put their time entries in a new system. If you haven't provided training, you don't get feedback, perhaps every 2 or 3 months at first, just to see what's working. And then after 6, 9, 12 months, take a good hard look at what worked well, what still needs to improve, and tweak it. It is continuous improvement. So I think that would be the sort of the main things that I've seen where you do those things, you've got a much better chance of success overall with a tech project.
Yeah, absolutely. Where the first point was about having a stakeholder team. So what is it
Yeah.
that you really mean by stakeholder? I'm assuming that's just not senior management.
Well, it's not, yeah, it's not just senior man. I mean, yes, you do need to have the person that's going to sign the check at the end of the day on
Hmm.
board, but it's really people about championing. I can't even say the word. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? To champion the process. So the, again, if you are changing your finance system in the law firm, there's good reason. It's not just for the accounts team, and quite often it's just seen as that. And the lawyers go, "Oh, yeah, we're just changing our finance system. It's going to cost us millions of dollars to do this over the next 5, 10 years," and there's no real enthusiasm. But if you can gather a team of people who understand the benefits of moving to a new system, whether that be improved efficiencies, collecting missing time that you wouldn't have previously got because the tools are more efficient and can find things, and giving them some metrics to look at that give them a reason. And then by doing that, you're going to get them on board a little bit further as to, okay, now I'm going to disseminate that information down to the rest of the firm, saying, hey, if we get this new system, we're going to find an extra half an hour a week each. And if you're a 100 lawyer firm, that half an hour a week each adds up pretty quickly. And it could technically justify the cost of your software quite easily in a lot of cases. So it's really having some of those types of metrics and success measurements that you can spread out amongst the teams. Again, getting champions involved. So I mean, the stakeholder team shouldn't just be the managing partner and the IT director. Have a couple of people from accounts, have a couple of people from the precedent management team or the secretarial pool or the junior lawyers, the paralegals, the people who are doing a lot of the grunt work and doing the research and probably the ones using the systems the most. Just get them involved, give them a seat at the table. It doesn't have to be a huge group of people, but I think having a broad spread from the business will allow ideas to be shared, and make it for a much more successful project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the heart of any change management, whether that's tech or otherwise, the people that are going to be affected by the change, it's all about what's in it for them. They want to know how they're going to be impacted and what the benefit is. And I guess having
Yeah.
these stakeholders from across the business helps to really nail that and communicate that really well.
Yeah, there's no point in having senior management disinterested in why you're changing a product. It's having that negative feedback from beginning isn't going to create any success at all.
Mm. And I know saying you need to communicate with your team feels like really obvious advice, but I can back you up here in that it very rarely happens. It feels like something so
Mm.
obvious, but the amount of times we've got to go live and nobody realizes that this is happening is quite frightening.
Yeah, I've worked on a couple of projects where they've really done that well, and they would have like a weekly or a fortnightly project meeting, and then they would, I guess, sanitize the meetings minutes, and they would share them internally
Mm,
in their intranet. And so, look, we're making some good progress. Looks like we're going to be able to hit our targets, and this new feature we were shown in our training today, the group, we can't wait to share it with you. Just things like that that just make the rest of the business feel like they're involved, and they're not then scared by change. I think the biggest barrier to change is fear across the
mhm.
board. It's just the fear of the unknown, and I personally quite like change. I guess that's probably why I moved from England to Australia. I decided just to have a change of scenery, but people don't. So a lot of people like what they've had before. They think that a new system's going to get rid of their jobs. There's so much resistance. But if you make it seem beneficial and it's going to help their jobs make them more productive, you're going to get people bought in earlier than trying to win them later.
Yeah, I think that is brilliant advice. And if there's one thing anyone takes away, I think that is so key. It doesn't have to be a full thought through planned marketing comms. It really just can be
No.
an edited minute notes and everyone's on the same page. And like you said, everyone feels involved. I think that is a great takeaway.
And with tools that are available today, it just chucking your meeting minutes through ChatGPT and saying, make this a nice, clean, warm summary I can share with my team. It doesn't even have to take any work. It can be done in about 30 seconds and you can send it around. So it's really easy to share like snippets of information very easily.
Absolutely. Not to be cheesy, but it's a key blind spot of law firms not to be sharing that information.
Indeed. Yeah.
So next I want to talk about vendor selection and how firms
Mhm.
decide who the best supplier is for them. In the book, you talk through the five pillars of smart vendor selection. What should firms be considering when looking at options, and how do they know the best supplier for them? I guess from their point of view, they feel everyone is selling to them, everyone's going to say what they want to hear. That makes it really difficult for the firms to decide. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I've just been at a couple of conferences here in Australia in the last few weeks, and the number of new AI document verification vendors that are out there is unbelievable.
Mhm.
There's half a dozen, and I'm sure it's the same in the UK. Um, but there's so much out there. Again, when I was talking about firms that have been on a system for so long and they kind of putting their head up to have a look at what's about, there is so much out there. So it is hard to pick the right vendor. Again, it comes back to speak with your peers, speak to what other firms, look at what other firms have been doing. What have they picked? I mean, it quite happens generally in life. People see someone get a new Land Rover down the road and they want to have the same thing if they can afford it. So people follow what works well for other people. So that's definitely a good measure to look at. I think looking again goes beyond the features. So I keep coming back to the title of my book and the story I shared before about the CEO that doesn't do the RFP. It is about having a conversation with the vendor. One of the a story I had from a couple of years ago when I was with Elite, I was working on an RFP for a fairly large law firm, for about 200 lawyers, and they'd employed one of the big four consultants. I won't name them, but it narrows it down to four, to manage the process for them. Um, and these consultants didn't really know the legal tech landscape. And I actually decided not to respond to the RFP because I didn't feel that we fitted the brief. So I got a phone call from the consultants sort of telling me that, oh, you were the one of the front runners for this particular firm. You should really sort of put your application through. So I sort of revisited it, but it kind of turned out that they didn't really understand the different components. And in this particular example, the law firm in question, when I actually got to do the demos with them, we went on site. And only at that point did they realize that, oh, your system doesn't have a built-in DMS, despite the fact that that was in my RFP response. So I think what I'm getting to with this is you need to have a direct conversation with the vendor.
Mm,
Third parties are fine. And again, not plugging my own services, but having a consultant is great, but one that allows you to talk to the vendors. In this particular example I was telling you about, I was only allowed to deal with the consultants. I couldn't
mm,
talk to the actual law firm. And I think you're missing a whole piece of information from both sides. The vendor doesn't get context, and the law firm doesn't get to ask questions and really understand the solution. So I think it's definitely key to explore beyond just what you see on the brochure and on the website for the vendor, beyond what tick boxes were ticked in the RFP. Really get to know the vendor. Ask them, how can you address these two or three scenarios? These are real pain points for us. Show me with your system how we would get around that. Um, Also, talking to vendors about how they integrate with other systems. There's no point buying a solution that does everything perfectly, but it just doesn't have an API. It won't integrate with anything else. I mean, there's not many systems like that anymore now that won't do that. But I guess you've taken the point here. You just need to make sure that it can do things beyond what you're actually asking. What's the roadmap like for the vendor? Do they have a solid sort of direction with where they're taking things? What are other firms saying about them? Do they support you once you've gone live, or do they just wash their hands once you've signed the agreement? So a whole heap of things to consider when it comes to vendor selection that go way beyond what functionality the system has.
yeah, absolutely. And everyone's been in a room with someone or met someone, and you realize that they make you feel warm and listened to, and you sort of come away going, I don't know why I feel the way I do, but I just do. And sometimes that behavior and that culture can't really be explained until you really meet somebody and you get a feel for how they work with their teams, how they work internally, how they interact with the client. And if that's blocked, you're not going to really get a feel for how you're going to be treated.
Yeah, 100%. And during my time at Elite, I was fortunate enough to get some training. We did some consultative selling training, some external course was brought in. And it really sort of brings it home. When you're selling a large scale practice management solution to firms of all sizes, I was always liken it to toothpaste. You're not selling toothpaste. You don't just walk in and say, here's some new toothpaste. Would you like to buy a tube? And they say yes, and they give you the money and you walk away. It just isn't like that. Legal tech solutions, I mean, some of the smaller solutions are quite quick turnarounds, but a large PMS solution or a case management or a CRM system can take 3, 6, 9, 18, 24, 36 months to actually get to a signed agreement. And in that time, as the vendor, you need to be building up a relationship, understanding that firm's pain points. So there's a lot to be said about relationship. I think we sort of lost that a little bit along the way during COVID, unfortunately, but I think we're starting to get back to it again. But definitely having that direct contact between the vendor and the firm is going to help you. And like you said, it gets to that warmth. You know when you've got a connection. And I can quite often walk away from a meeting and say, yeah, these guys really get it. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get that business. And you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already mentioned data, but we're going to dive into it. We cannot ignore data if we're talking about successful migrations. We know it's the biggest delay, it's the cause of the biggest risk. There's a lot of confusion and stress around the data. You start your data chapter by saying, "The joy of moving data, said no one ever." I think we can all relate to that, all of our listeners for sure. How do firms know what data they should be moving? What prep should be done beforehand?
I would tell firms to leave it all behind personally, but that generally doesn't go down too well.
No.
But somewhere in the middle. Um, I guess again, this comes back to the changes in technology that we see now. I mean, going back 20, 30 years ago, a data migration was a mammoth task. I mean, it still is, it's still a mammoth task. But people didn't do it that often. And tools for migrating were complex. There's so many hundreds of hours get thrown into doing it. Um, Number of times in my early days with Elite, when Elite had CRM solutions, I'd go to a firm and they'd want every single field that they had in their current system moved to the new one. They wanted a place to put it. And it turns out when you analyze the data that out of the 600,000 records, only 6 records actually had that piece of data in the field.
Mhm.
So from a time and effort perspective, it's trying to understand, get the firm to understand that the effort to program the migration of those 6 fields is the same effort as the effort needed to migrate 600,000. You've still got to map the data and you've got to run the program. Yes, the program runs quicker because there's not much data, but the effort in getting it to work is still there. And then you have to test it. So there's a lot of cases, I think, in terms of preparing for a data migration. I always try and encourage, if it's possible, to leave as much behind, particularly in the practice management world. Quite often, these firms have had a migration from one system 15 years ago, and then they acquired another solution, another firm, sorry, and brought that data in 8 years ago, and then 5 years ago, there was another one. Then they bought a new system. So there's all these bits of data that don't live in the current system. They won't validate. Um, I mean, for example, a system like Elite 3 that I was selling for the last few years, it validates data. So the good part about that is you can't put data in wrong once it's in there, but it causes a big headache if you don't keep your data clean when you're putting it in because it won't validate and the system won't work if it doesn't validate.
Mhm.
So there's pros and cons to that, but I think with modern technology and data warehousing, I think the options are there to be able to convince firms now to leave a lot more behind than they previously would or could. I guess what I mean by that is that I now try and encourage firms, if they're moving to a new practice management system, that they just take over the active data. Of course, take all your client and matter sort of metadata records, so the names of your clients and the names of your matters, but don't bring all the transactional and extra data. With, again, modern technology, you can leave that old data in a SQL database that you can query with numerous tools and create reports. Um, it's one of the biggest conversations I would have with firms was battling with them over the data that they brought across, and they insisting on having everything. And it turns out that they end up then adding 30–40% to the implementation cost and time. There's extra validation time at the other end, and it just creates a big headache. Whereas now I try and encourage people to absolutely take what you need. There's things you have to have, but you can always access the other stuff. It doesn't go away. You can take it and put it somewhere, and there are so many smart people now who can write reports and get access to it. And I found that the firms that were worried about needing access to old data, you ask them 12 months after go live, and they will tell you, oh, yeah, I only needed that once. I've only had to go and get the IT guy to find me that piece of data once or twice in the 12 months, and it doesn't get used. So definitely something to think about.
Yeah, I would love to pick your brains on the practicalities of all of that. Perhaps we need to regroup and do a separate conversation because we don't have time today. But it's things like that and it's advice like that that law firms really need access to because I think the data landscape can just feel really complicated. It just feels too much. So
Mm.
the easy option is just
Yep.
bring it all over so we can see it. So perhaps we'll pick that up another time. We're yet to talk fully about people. We've talked about change management. We talked about the stakeholder group slightly. I mean, having the right group of people on your project is crucial to success. I was actually talking to Shona from Laterna Consulting, who agreed that projects often fail because they're under-resourced. They just simply don't have the manpower.
Yep.
In the book, you mention it's crucial to have a change champion on the project team. I absolutely love this concept, and it's something we try and do at Osprey. Who should be the change champion, and why are they so vital in the project?
Yeah, I think I mean in the sales side of the world, we were always looking for the coach, as we used to call them, at the law firm, the person that's your friend that understands what you've got to sell and can help sort of communicate that to the firm because you need somebody at the firm that understands how the firm works, not necessarily from the top level, can be from the bottom level, somewhere in the middle, but you need people who are respected in the business. Like there's always going to be someone in every firm that if they, oh, how do I do that? How do I run that template again? And you go, oh yeah, Joan over in the property team, she's a whiz with that. She knows how to do that. So there's always people that every firm has them they go to. And then there'd be the people that no, I wouldn't touch Fred with that because he's terrible. He doesn't like tech. So everyone knows those people, and I'm sure people listening are probably thinking about those types of people right now. But a change champion is someone that actually helps embed the thought process that's gone behind why you're changing and creates benefits around the change and the reasons why and helps disseminate that information across the firm. Having the vendor tell the firm, you're going to love this new system, it's going to make you 5 times more efficient, you're going to sell 5 times more this, you're going to have more of this. That's great, but that's just the vendor saying these things. They may well be true, and they probably are. It's just that people don't get that credibility. But if you've got someone at the firm who speaks with other firms and they can sort of spread the word in your firm and say, yeah, I was speaking to this lady from this other firm and they've had this project and this has worked really well for them. It's going to be great. It's going to take us a little bit of a while to settle in, but we'll get over that. So it's really about having someone to sort of nurture the firm through the process and really make it a positive experience. Because again, I think I mentioned it's too often people fear change and people then get negative. Negativity seems to grow quicker than positivity, sadly. Um, it's a case across the world these days, but I think that in itself is a big part of what a change champion should be. It doesn't have to be just be one, it can be 2 or 3 people. They're, again, people that are liked in the firm and that you can sit down with them and explain what you're trying to achieve, get them on board and get them to help with the comms, with the testing, with the conversations, and again, just soften the whole process.
Yeah, they almost become your internal influencers. They're
Yeah, I
the
guess so.
peers, the colleagues that can have that influence and nudge people in the right direction in a softly way.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I think without them, it's impossible to have that really effective communication. I think you're right. Sometimes if it feels led by the top too much, or they feel it's
Mm.
led by senior management, if they have a worry or have a struggle, they feel there's no one to go to. Whereas if they know there's someone, a colleague on their team who's also in the project, they can share their worries, they can ask questions, they can be a bit sly about it and not feel like it's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah, they can have a moan to someone who's sort of on the same level as them. You go, oh, I really don't think this is going to be great. And then that change champion can say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but just think about how it's going to be when we've got this working because you're not going to have to do that thing anymore. And
Mm.
as soon as they realize, oh, what, I don't have to do that. Oh, okay, this is going to be great. So just having those little types of conversations and having a few people dotted about that can do that. Not every firm finds it easy to find those people, and not every firm wants people like that out and about in their project. But I think where it can be encouraged, you're going to get a much better result.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, gravitate to those that show an interest in that sort of stuff. I'm sure, like you said, you'll
Yeah.
know those people who are tech savvy and do that stuff in their free time. Gravitate towards finding those people who can really be passionate about the project you're working on.
And also, there's no harm in finding the grumpy old partner that has a stack of papers on his desk and trying to convince them. Because if you can convince that person, you're never going to fail. So
That's so
sometimes
true.
it's worth going for the person in the corner office with the stacks of paper and convince them that if they do it in the new way, they're going to make so much more money. And if you put it in those terms and show it to them, yeah, it can certainly help.
That's a great shout. If everyone goes, oh gosh, Fred's behind this project now, it must be a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that idea. I want to finish on your quote from chapter 13. It says, if you think the job is done once the system is switched on, think again. We did mention continuous improvement earlier. That chapter
Hmm.
discusses the importance of that and continuous optimization. Can we finish on your guidance and advice for strategic continuous improvement? And have you got any examples of what that should look like?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a mention on the way here. I mean, the solution selection is just a tiny part of the entire journey. And if you're thinking about a timeline, solution selection is probably only a third of the way along the timeline. The first third sort of being the realizing that you need something new, uh, working through what those requirements are, planning, preparing, finding the right vendor, implementing the solution. I think I've mentioned already that it's so many times I see that there's this project fatigue. You get to the go live, there's a big sigh of relief. Everything seems to be working on day one. Champagne corks get popped and people move on. But there is never a plan, in a lot of cases, to take that any further. Nobody does any continuous feedback loops. And by that I mean is you don't have to be in people's faces 24/7. But for the first month or two, for sure, have some people, maybe you change champions, have them wandering the floors of the business, making sure if people are happy. You don't have to be doing anything necessarily, just a couple of questions here and there. How do you find the new billing process? How do you find that new onboarding process? How are you doing with time entry? And if there are little niggles and problems, write them down. Have a channel for people to give feedback. Put something on the internet, a little form that just says feedback. And I've been doing sort of, I use my Mac here at home, and I've been doing the public beta of the latest OS. There's a feedback app that comes with that. So if I find something I don't like, you can log that as a ticket. So just encourage people to do that sort of idea when a system goes live. And also make sure that you train people. I've seen so many times doing projects, and this is a mistake that the vendors do sometimes. They train you on a solution at the beginning of the project, and then they don't come back to the training. Um, if at all, sometimes lightly, rarely heavily. So you've been trained and you've had your product orientation in week one, but now you're in week 26 and you've forgotten what you saw back at the beginning. Things have changed, things have moved on. So having training planned well in advance of the go live, and then have training options for just check-in training, continuous training. I don't know, every other week have a 1 hour workshop that just goes through and like a Q&A session, but just really have a process and the means to get feedback from people. Make sure that you have regular check-ins with the vendor so that they're not just leaving you high and dry from day one. Need to make sure that they're going to still check in with you every quarter at least, keeping you informed about new updates in their software, getting them to sort of look at how you're using the system and see if they can recommend improvements. So it is an ongoing effort. It doesn't actually stop until you choose your next system, really. But clearly, the time between check-in and feedback should lengthen over time and things will settle in. But it's certainly something that cannot be overlooked. Otherwise, you are destined to fail.
Yeah, sorry to tell everyone listening, but yeah, it doesn't stop. And crucially, actually, with software and software nowadays, is that it's always updating. So there's always going to be new features you could take advantage of and get trained on and utilize. I think actually your point about go live and vendor selection being a third of the journey is actually really represented in your book. I was kind of surprised as I read through it. I expected it all to be about, selecting it and then up to go live, but actually there's a lot of content and advice in there about how to manage after that and what that looks like. So I can't recommend the book enough, from being super prepared and having some really practical guidance for how to go about this, because we're not here to say it's a small undertaking. We appreciate the time and resource that goes into it. But if you're going to do it, let's do it properly. Make sure you take advantage of the advice out there, take advantage of the vendors and the suppliers and their knowledge and the services that there are to offer. And yeah, we wish you all the success in those projects that are going on. Thank you so much, David, for sharing your advice and guidance on this. It's been really great to chat.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's been good to talk this thing through. So, and clearly you've read my book, so that's always a plus.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, David. Thanks, everybody.